Okay. All right. It's good to see everybody. It's good to be back schmoozing with everybody. Let's talk a little bit about Sphera. Title of today is using Sphera to perfect ourselves. I think that hopefully will be a good title. I hope by the end. But first thing we talk about before we get into that is the leaving Pesach and moving into Sphira, Shavuos, right? The summer. Again, we've talked about this in the past, but it requires Chazara, just like Mesilas Yesharim says at the beginning. Sometimes the simple things require Chazara. Very often, right, when we have a holy experience, like we hopefully all did during Pesach, you need to keep that experience with you, right? It's true for all holidays, right? Really, you got to learn how to keep the experience with you, right? To use the themes of the holiday to kind of jumpstart, right, the next time period and elevate your Shemayim. And we've talked about, sources that underscore that idea. And again, I've definitely mentioned these Makoros in the past, but like I said, Chazara is good. Yetzer Hara is very good at making us forget holy experiences. I mean, just think about it on a weekly basis, right? How quickly you forget Shabbos, right? Motzei Shabbos hits and boom, Shabbos is over. Give me my phone. Let's go to Dunkin'. I don't know, whatever's popular. Yeah. Sunday's vacation. Okay. Monday stinks because you're going back to whatever you're doing. And then by Tuesday, you have no idea what day it is already. And you don't even know what Shabbos is. You even forget what happened. So if you had an amazing Shabbos, it's long gone. So again, this is something that you use weekly, but again, regardless, but certainly when the Chagim, right, come through. So we definitely have to kind of remind ourselves, right, what was happening on Seder night and Shvi Shel Pesach and all that type of stuff. So just quickly, again, to run through, right, the quick set of sources that I think we did after Sukkot, but it's fine. It's good chazara. Mesilas Yesharim writes in Perek Chafei, right, that Hesach Hadas, right, deviating, right, losing your mind and focusing on something else is the greatest obstacle to acquiring your Shemayim, to acquiring for heaven. The Gemara says in Eruvin and Daf Daled that Rabbi Preda taught a student something 400 times. The student spaced out and had Hezek Hadas, had to teach it to them another 400 times. Gemara Megillah and Davav, right, it says that when there's two Adars, like we'll have this year, is upcoming year, Mitzvah Shem, there's a debate as to whether you do Purim in the first Adar or the second Adar. The Gemara says maybe you should do it in the first Adar because in Marvi and all mitzvahs, we don't want to pass up holy experiences. And perhaps the Gemara says maybe we should do it in the second Adar because Mismach Gula Legula Adar, if we want to connect Purim and Pesach, two redemptions. And the Gemara decides, as you're probably aware, that you do Purim in the second Adar because it's good to connect the redemption of Purim and Pesach, right? We want to make sure that we have a connection between two periods of growth. The Gemara tells us, and the Torah tells us, in parts of Shoftim, right, that the king has to wear a Sefer Torah on his arm always, right, to remind him of the Torah. You guys know the Gemara Ksubas and Daf Samach Gimel that Rabbi Akiva went to learn for 12 years before he came home. He heard his wife saying, "Oh, if only he learned for another 12 years." He went right back to the base medrash, right? Again, you guys have heard this, right? Why didn't he just go inside, say Shalom Aleichem, say how are you? Because he knew that 12 plus 12 does not equal 24. And again, these Makoros I didn't compile. This is Rav Chaim Shmulevitz and Sichos Musar, right? He says the mashal, right, famous mashal. If you want to boil water, right, you need to boil the water straight through, right, from the initial heating all the way to the boiling. If you take the water off the heat for any amount of time, right, you lose some of the heat that you've created. And if you start and stop even 1,000 times, right, you'll never get right to boiling temperature, right? So again, so the idea is that we have to connect holy experiences and go from one to the next and create that kind of aliyah, that continuous growth, right, for ourselves. And to be clear, I'm not just saying that there's no holiness in everyday life, right? It just means that there's certain lessons and impacts and things, right, from certain times of the year, we need to keep them right with us rather, even after the time period has elapsed, right? Again, the easiest example is Yom Noraim, right? If you're doing it right, you have Elul, you have Rosh Hashanah, you have Yom Kippur, you have Sukkot, Hoshana Rabbah, Shmini Atzeres, and then bam, you hit Mar Cheshvan with a month of nothing. Right, so again, so we schmoozed about it, how to keep sukkahs going. So let's talk about how to keep Pesach going through the Sefira, right, and through to Shavuos. Now it is a little bit easier, like I said, right. You get the Mar Cheshvan and everything disappears. This is a little bit easier because you do have Sefiras HaOmer and Shavuos, and obviously we talked about this a little bit, and we're going to try not to repeat the same messaging that we had before Pesach. Specifically, what are we looking to learn about Sefiras HaOmer that will keep this Indian of Pesach and freedom and going from right, the slavery to Geula, right? How will that help us keep it going and help us perfect ourselves or start perfecting ourselves towards towards Shavuos. First of all, again, a shmooze you may have heard already, not from me necessarily in this last couple months, but you may have heard again from the Nesivos Shalom. But this piece is important to frame, right, the discussion in terms of what we're talking about. He asks two questions. You have to know a little bit about the psukim. I'll say them to you. It's not crucial, right? But again, he asks first of all on the pasuk of that talks about Sefiras HaOmer, right? The pasuk says, "Usfartem lachem imacharas haShabbos miyom aviachem es Omer hatnufa sheva Shabbosos timino siena." Right? Ach tisbru lachem chamishim yom. No, that's not exact quote, but anyway, he says tisbru lachem chamishim yom. You should count 50 days, right? V'yikravtem mincha chadasha l'Hashem. At the end of 50 days, you're going to bring a new mincha. Now, what in the world is going on over there? So first of all, right, we start counting. That's the pasuk tells me that Sefiras Omer starts second day of Pesach, right? And right at the end of 50 days, we're going to bring a new mincha, a mincha chadasha. What's a mincha? It's a mincha that we're referencing over here is a korban called the shtei lechem, which is two breads that were brought on Shavuos with along with animals as well, but that's not the point we're focusing on. And so basically, long story short, we start on the second day of Pesach with the korban omer, which is brought from barley. It's also kind of ground into flour and mixed with oil, whatever. And then is the korban okay, whatever. If I brought from barley, that's the ikar part, that's the most important part. And then at the end, the shtei lechem is brought from wheat. Now the korban the pasuk seems to tie says this in Sivas Shalom the pasuk seems to tie the korban to the counting, right? At the end of 50 days you're going to bring this new mincha, this new korban mincha, this new flour offering to Hashem. What is the connection between the counting and this bringing of the flour korban? Second of all, he says, if you look at the psukim, not that pasuk that I quoted, but the other psukim, so they refer to both the korban omer and the shtei lechem, both the korban, again, the korban omer is the korban brought at the beginning of Sefiras Omer, and the shtei lechem is the korban brought on Shavuos at the end of Sefiras Omer. Both of those korbanos are called hatnufa, the korban that is waved. Waved as in like literally waved, picked up and waved all around, north, south, east, and west, right? Hashem is here, Hashem is there, Hashem is truly everywhere. Good. Says the Nesivos Shalom, those are not the only korbanos that are waved. There's korban shlamim is waved, whatever, without boring you with those details. Why does the pasuk specifically call the korban brought at the beginning of Sefiras Omer and the korban brought at the end of Sefiras Omer the waving korbanos? It's very strange that it should highlight that and call it that, like the Omer Hatnufa, the Lechem Hatnufa, the waved korbanos. Okay, so now, what's going on over here? So he says again the imagery that you've heard before that the korban omer, which is brought on Pesach, was made out of barley. Barley was animal food. The shtei lechem, which was brought on Shavuos, was made out of wheat flour. That's human food. And he compares, right, that in Mitzrayim, Bnei Yisrael were basically animals, right? They were on the 49th level of Tumah. They were of the Avodah Zarah. They were, steeped in Mitzri culture. And through the Sefiras Omer, right, the Jews went from being animals to humans. Again, we talked about this a little bit, right? Getting their free will in the realm of morality, purifying their midos, etc., etc. So what you see, though, says the Nesivos Shalom, is that during the days of Sefira, the Jews completely changed their mohus, their reality, their existence, right? Their definition, right? They created a new reality for themselves, right? An animal, a cow, right, cannot accept the Torah, does not receive the Torah. There's nothing a cow can do with the Torah. Only a person, a human being who has ability to think, etc., and process can receive the Torah. So when he says the phrase mincha chadasha l'Hashem, a new korban mincha, says in the Nesivos Shalom, that was a hint to the fact that the Jews became new people, new creatures. A bria chadash is what he calls it, going from animal to human. And so the Sefira brought Bnei Yisrael, right, to this new reality, right? 49 days from Mitzrayim to Maimon Har Sinai, where they were able to receive the Torah. So when the pasuk says "V'ikravtem mincha chadasha l'Hashem," you're going to bring a new korban mincha, and that's connected to the Sefira. It's connected to the 50 days, where that's how Bnei Yisrael were able to mold themselves and create themselves anew, right, through going through this process of purifying themselves, right, one level of tumah every single day. Okay, he says very cute. He says that if the phrase mincha chadasha, right, a new mincha, what is the letters that it starts with? What is it? Rosh Tevos. What is it in abbreviation? It's mem ches. Right, mincha chadasha, mem ches. Mem ches in Hebrew is moach. Moach is a brain. Brain is what separates man from animal, right? And that's kind of the same idea, right? He says parenthetically, right? He says that this is how you can understand the emphasis of Shabbosos, of Shabbos during Sefira, right? We count Sheva Shabbosos to Mimos Tiena, 7 full weeks, but it literally means 7 Shabboses. And he says on Shabbos also, we become another creature, through the holiness we can attain, right? We can get to different levels on Shabbos, etc., etc. Okay, a lot of the Divrei Torah and the Siva Shalom very often come back to Shabbos, just as an aside. But anyway, so that's why, first of all, it ties the new korban, the wheat korban that we brought on Shavuos to the Sefira, because Bnei Yisrael were able to go from barley to wheat, from animal to person to human. And it was a new korban, it was a new existence. And that's also why the korbanos were called tenufa, waving. Because to accomplish this, right, the Shalom says, for a person to grow, for a person to accomplish spiritually, a person has to move. Person's got to move in order to change. I saw literally today, I saw one of those, quote unquote doctors on X or Twitter, whatever it's called. You know those LOL, right? Okay, that's it. 50-second statement as if like they're, Moshe Rabbeinu, right? Apparently, but what do they say? The clip that my friend sent me was that muscle movements releases certain endorphins or toxins, I don't even know, that helps with a person's mood, literal antidepressants, and as she called it, a pharmacy in your muscles. Okay, whatever. That's cute, adorable. But that's the idea. That's the sources in Chazal. That's actually the pshat. And so a person needs to move. A person needs to move to grow. A person needs to move to accomplish. And that's why it was called the korbanos of moving, right? Bnei Israel moved from animals to human, right? They had to actually get themselves up and going. He points out that the Levium, right, before the Levium were upgraded to become the Levium, right? As I don't know if you're familiar, but the Bechorim, the firstborn, were the ones who were doing the avoda in the Mishkan. Before the Aaron and the Levium got promoted. So in Parshas Baaloscha or Naso, I don't remember. I think okay, I don't remember. The Aaron had to actually literally pick up and wave the Levium. Right, the pasuk says in Bamidbar Ches Yud Aleph, right? Vehenif Aaron et haLevim tinufa lefnei Hashem meis bnei Yisrael v'hayu la'avodas avodas Hashem. That when the Levium were going to be inaugurated to work in the Mishkan and in the Beis Hamikdash, Aaron literally had to pick them up, and the Gemara says it's a proof to Aaron's great strength. Right, Rabbeinu Bechaya says this as well, right? That because there were 22,000 of them, and Aaron picked them all up, right, at that day. Okay, either that or it was a miracle. But Pashas, right? So the Levium had to be waved, right? These korbanos had to be waved, and the imagery is that a person has to get moving. A person has to get changing. A person has to put in effort, right, to get off your tuchus, to go change and to accomplish, and to grow again during this Sefiras HaOmer. The question becomes, what should you do specifically? Right? What should you change? How should you change your outlook, your reality, the way you view yourself? Right? What you'll be working on. So Rav Pinkus has a beautiful illustration, and I think by the end of it, hopefully, it will change a lot of things in terms of how you view yourself. I would even go so far as to say. Um, when I read it, I thought it was extremely powerful, especially, and I hopefully I'll say it over okay to the point where you can appreciate it as well. Says Rav Pinkus, what are we trying to accomplish Sefiras HaOmer? What is the deeper meaning behind the mitzvah of Sefiras HaOmer? Again, Sefiras HaOmer is a Torah mitzvah. It's written in the Torah. Usvartem lachem, we quoted the psukim. We have, obviously, he says, we have an obligation to do mitzvos, right, without a reason, right? Torah says do X, it's no problem, but that's what we're supposed to do. But there are also underlying themes, right, behind the mitzvos to kind of help us grow and kind of help us going in the right direction. For example, the Rambam writes by shofar, right, that even though it's exeres akasuv, the Torah says, Hashem says to blow shofar on Rosh Hashanah. Okay, there's a hint to it, says the Rambam, right, in Hilchos Tshuva, Perek Gimel, Halacha Daled, right, the pasuk says, Uru yishenim mishenaschem, wake up, you sleeping people from your slumber, and he says that's what's going on by a shofar. Again, we blow shofar because Hashem said so. But right, there's this idea that we want to wake ourselves up to do tshuva. He says matzah as well, right? We have to eat matzah because the Torah said to eat matzah. But in the Haggadah, we say matzah zu shanu oklim al shumma. Why are we eating this matzah? And we talk about Yetzias Mitzrayim, etc. The sukkah is an anei hakavod. Same idea. So what's the deal, right, with Sefiras HaOmer? So he quotes the Chinuch. If you ever look at the Sefer Chinuch is very good because he gives all the halachos, but then he also tries, not all the halachos, but many halachos, and he tries to give the reason and the background for mitzvos. So the Chinuch says, right, that the ikar of Am Yisrael is Torah, as no surprise there. Right? Akash Baruch Hu looked into the Torah and created the world. That's why Bnei Israel were redeemed from Mitzrayim. Right? We talked about the Ramban's view of freedom and along those lines, etc. And there was, there was a bigger purpose from being freed. When Bnei Israel were freed, it wasn't just taking them out of bondage. It was to give them the Torah. Okay, right? Again, this is stuff you've heard before. So therefore, Bnei Israel were commanded to count from Pesach to Shavuos to show how excited they were. Hold on, stay with me. This stuff you know, right? To show how excited we are, right, to receive the Torah. Because when a person counts towards something, it shows how excited they were for it, right? When the girls count down to, when they're going home, can't wait. Oh my gosh, 3 days until we're going home, 2 days until we're going home, 1 day until we're going home. Yeah, okay, Baruch Hashem. Hopefully they're counting to the days that they come back. It's Hashem, Amen, Kenny Ratzon. Skies are open. Come on, guys. Flights are available. Anyway, therefore, so it says the Siva Shalom, the Chinuch, we count, right, when we're excited for something. Therefore, and this is the part that is surprising, therefore the Chinuch says, during Sefiras HaOmer, we count up, not down. And therefore, we mention how many days have passed, not how many days are left, because that shows, right, a desire to arrive at that point. Now, the problem is that the famous question works the opposite way. Right? Normally, if you're counting towards something, you're counting down. Right? You're counting down till you leave seminary, whatever. You're counting down till, whatever. This simcha, that simcha, Baruch Hashem. Counting down shows that, not counting up. Right? The Chinuch says, simcha, we're so excited to get this to Matan Torah, to Shavuos, therefore we count up. What in the world does that mean? So what is the counting up? So Pincus quotes Rav Aaron Kotler, founder and Rosh Yeshiva of Beish Medrash Gavoa, BMG, right in Lakewood, if you're familiar. He was evacuated from Vilna in 1941, founded the yeshiva in 1943. Anyway, so he explains as follows. We quote in the Disney shiur, I like to quote in the Disney shiur, that to prove that Yaakov didn't love Rachel in the sense when the pasuk says he loved her, right? It wasn't that he was head over heels, right? Obviously, it was Yaakov Avinu, right? We're not talking about teenage love here. Anyway, so the one of the pasuk that talks about Yaakov and Rachel's discussion, relationship was that when the pasuk says, right, when he worked out the deal with Lavan to work for Rachel for 7 years, the pasuk says, "Vayhi beinav ki yamim achadim." It was in his eyes as if it was just a few days. Be'ahavoso oso, because in his love for her. And we explained in the slideshow, if you remember, that it doesn't make sense. I mean, that it should be the opposite, right? If you love someone, right, love sickness makes 7 days feel like 7 years. Right? It doesn't make 7 years feel like 7 days. Right. So, we like to point out that it clearly wasn't the love that, that we're used to. Okay. Anyway, but Rav Kotler points out that what was Yaakov doing during those 7 years to make it seem like 7 days? Says Rav Aaron Kotler, it must be that Yaakov was purifying himself, building himself, preparing herself, right, for the creation of Am Yisrael. And says Rav Pincus, that's what we're trying to do during Sefira as well. Right. He gives a mashal, right? He gives a great mashal. He says, let's say a person is told that in 100 days, they're going to be given $1 million. So every day is kind of like another day where you're not yet rich. It's not fun, right? You're waiting, right? Every day. I don't want to say it's agony. It's not suffering, shall we say. But a person is bored, kind of, can't wait till it shows up, right? They can't wait for time to pass. However, if he would flip the example a little bit, and that person needed $1 million in a month, let's say, and they were advised, if you do X, Y, and Z job every day, you'll profit $10,000. And then after 100 days, you'll have $1 million. Well, those days pass much faster, right? Those days have purpose. They have meaning. They have goals. There's actions, something for you to do. And the difference is, right, for the guy who's just waiting, right, for 100 days for the $1 million, those days are empty, right? They're purposeless. They're just a barrier. The time period is just a barrier between him and his riches, right? But for the guy who's told you have to work every single day, it's the opposite, right? Every day is a day of a building, of accomplishing, of getting closer to your goal. And if you miss a day, so that's one day that wasn't spent well. So one day he doesn't get closer to his goal, right? Both guys get $1 million at the end of 100 days. The difference simply is how you spend, right, those 100 days. And that was what Yaakov was doing, right? He built himself over those 7 years so that every day was a day of of accomplishment, of joy, and therefore pass quickly. And that's why, says Pincus, we count up and not down, and that's how show it passes quickly for us. Right? I don't know if it's 2 weeks already. I don't know. It's passing pretty fast for me. If we were told that in 50 days we would get the Torah, so then we would count down towards it because the day would be pointless and lacking in any purpose. It'd just be a barrier. But when you have Sphira, the Sphira are the days of preparation, of building towards Kabbalas Torah. Right after one day of preparation, we're more worthy of being able to receive the Torah. There's more room for Torah to penetrate our minds, etc. After 2 days, we're even more worthy. 3, 4, v'chule. That's what Sefiras HaOmer is. Right, it's 49 days, right, of building. Now, stay with me because we're still getting to the point. Don't get bummed out if you've already missed the first 2 weeks, right? You can still accomplish plenty, right, in the 5 weeks that are left. By the way, that's more time than you get for Elul, right? Elul was only 30 days, right? Here we got 35 left, right? But our job is to fill these days with purpose. And economy, you're not going to be studying Torah 29 hours a day, right? But there should be purpose, a building, right, a plan of accomplishment to ready ourselves for Kabbalah Torah. The question is, though, what do you choose? What do you build? You choose midos, tefillah, fasting, right? New avenues of Torah study, right? Long hours, right, in front of like text and stuff like that. So as you might imagine, there are a bunch of things, right, that you could pick, right? Either you could pick, right, you could pick some Bein Adam L'Chavero, right, and that would be very appropriate, right? We know about Rabbi Kiva and all his Talmidim and Lanogo Kavod Zevazeh, etc., right? We learn Pirkei Avos, v'chule v'chule. You could pick that. That's good, right? Limud Torah, right? You could increase your Limud Torah, and that would be good, right? Nothing like strengthening your learning Torah in preparation for Kabbalas Torah, right? We say every day, "V'sein chalkeinu b'sar zecha." Let us find our chilek in Torah, the thing that we could learn, the thing that we relate to most, the thing that we're able to give over as best as we can. Okay, that would be good. Rav Pinkus says a person should try and focus on the concept of Yichud Hashem. Now, what in the world does that mean? So he explains as follows, right? Shavuos, now, Sefiras HaOmer has a tremendous relationship with, well, I guess we could get to this at the end because that's really the proof. Let's explain what it means and then we'll get to the proof why he says specifically for Sefiras HaOmer. Yichud Hashem means remembering that Hashem is, right, Yochid Umyuchad, right, Hayahova V'iyah, right, whole, complete, everything, Ein Od Milvado, whichever Hebrew phrase, right, you want. Reminding ourselves and understanding that there's a complete package here. Hashem is everything in the world and everything in our lives as well. He says, how do we get to that, to truly understand this? He says, think about it. He says, first of all, 49 is 7 times 7, and I'm not into these number type things, but I think this is actually very illustrative, very beautiful. He says 49 is 7 times 7. What's the first 7? The first 7, right, is the 7 days of the week. What's 7 days of the week? 7 days of creation. Right? Hashem created the world in 7 days. Says Rapinkus, points out Rapinkus, that's just the chitzonius. That's just the outside. That's just the way the world looks. Hashem created the world in 7 days, and the way that it looks, fish, water, mountains, whatever. But there's much more depth to it, right? There's so much more depth to the world, and again, I'm not sure exactly what he means by this, but through the other weeks we can kind of get to that. Now, what does that mean? So it says, take example. Let's say there's a picture. Let's say you have a picture of a rabbi right behind me. If you didn't have the Baer Miriam kind of background, I have a bunch of pictures of rabbis in my base medrash over here. So the picture of a rav doesn't depict the rabbi in all of his amazing qualities, in his depths of knowledge, his midos, his accomplishments, his chesed, his purity. It's just a picture, right? The actual person has depth, right? Has substance to it, right? So too the world, right? There's a depth behind what we see with our eyes, right? There's a world mass going on. There's so much going on behind the scenes. How do we access this depth? How do we see behind the scenes and realize that, if you haven't said Birkas Ilanos, right? So I always miss Birkas Ilanos, or Chas Shalom miss. I always wait till the end to say Birkas Ilanos. It's a bracha you say when you see the trees in bloom with their new fruits in Nisan. So I said it yesterday, Baruch Hashem, right? You're supposed to say it till the end of Chodesh Nisan, and Friday's Rosh Chodesh. Anyway, what the Torah teaches us, right, that there's a depth behind this world, right? There's a depth behind the trees that are making fruit. Akash Baruch Hu is doing that for a reason. And a reason why this, that, and the other thing. Victor Miller, whose your site was this week, also always talks about the little things in life. And Akash Baruch Hu has a purpose to every single tiny little thing. And the Torah shows us that. The Torah teaches us to learn and look behind all the things that we see. And the Torah gives us meaning for all the physical things in life, right? The Torah gives us meaning and depth for behind making a living, going to school, looking for a spouse, every single eating, drinking, all this type of stuff. So our job is to build this worldview, right? To build ourselves as that kind of person, not just a picture, right? But a walking, talking, living, breathing picture who has depth and meaning and complexity and purity and all the facets of a person, right? All the little tiny aspects that you have of you, right? The goal is, right, to perfect, right, every single one of them. For example, it says Rapinkus, let's take a yeshiva bacher, right? Just because, he was speaking to yeshiva guys. Take a yeshiva bacher, learns morning seder, fire and brimstone, amazing, fabulous, wonderful. Goes outside, realizes it's hot, he's thirsty, goes over to the water machine, takes a cup of water, and downs it without making a bracha. So that moment is a moment of forgetting Hakadosh Baruch Hu, right? God forbid, well, obviously, God forbid. So all that's entered into his mind is, oh, I'm hot. It's thirsty. He hasn't thought of who made it hot, who with the capital W, who made the water, who gave him the water, or the technology to fetch water. At that moment, he's forgetting HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He's forgetting Hashem's unity. He's forgetting that Hashem is in everything. That's a moment. That's an example of a moment in our lives without Yichud Hashem. That's a moment in our lives without realizing Hashem's oneness. Now, this is obviously we're talking high levels here. Again, we're going to relate it to every single day to day, but that's just one example. I'm not saying that, you guys have to hit that level now or ever, but we should definitely strive for that level. And even though it won't happen in this spheres of Omer, not for me and not for you, but it might happen in 30 or 40 spheres of Omers, and you'll never hit that level if you don't start working on yourself in the first spheres of Omer. You can't get to this level on spheres of Omer number 40, right? If you haven't built on the backs of all the other spheres Omer has been in your life. Okay, but anyway, that's what we're shooting for. Recognize the Kosh Baruch Hu and all the single little things in our lives to the point where we know Inod Milvado. Right? The Hasidim use a phrase that the Oraisa of Akud Shabrichu Chadu, right? That the Torah and Hashem are one, right? And that receiving the Torah and knowing Hashem's oneness, right, is the same thing. Okay, long story short, that's the goal. Says Pinkus, how do we know that? And I realize this part has been a little bit long. Bear with me. We're almost at the punchline. He explains like this, that knowing that Hashem is one means knowing that He's complete, that Hashem is involved in every single aspect of our lives. Again, the yeshiva bacher, right? Again, who drinks water without a bracha, that's a failing, right? That's a hole in his avodas Hashem. Rav Pinkus explains that our avoda during Sefira right now could be understood through a Chavetz Chaim, right, in Parshas V'Eschanan. The Chavetz Chaim also has a sefer on Chumash, and the Chavetz Chaim says in Parshas V'Eschanan, he asks a very simple question. He says, "Why in the world do people worship avodah zarah?" Makes no sense. Right? Smart people, right, think that we just evolved as a species or the world just evolved into what it is. How could smart people worship idols? Right? They think of evolution, well, whatever it is. So he explains that Hashem causes the nations of the world to go astray. Right? Pasuk says, says Hashem is maybe you'll look at the sky and you'll see all the constellations, etc. And you'll bow down to them. And you'll serve them. Asher chalak Hashem Elokecha oshsam. That Hashem has chalak. What does that mean? That Hashem has chalak them. So Rashi there says that Hashem has not refrained from letting the goyim slip up and think that these things are real in order to drive them from the world. Right? Asher, the chalak is like lachlik, chalakti. If a person says, I slipped, I was in, my oldest was playing baseball down Cholamoid. He slipped coming around third base, slammed his head on the concrete. We were in the hospital with a concussion for a bunch of hours on Friday night. Walked back, showed up 12 a.m. The wife is so good. She kept the soup on the hot plate so that we'd have hot soup at midnight. God bless her. Anyway, so we said in Hebrew in the hospital was ichlakti. I didn't tell them third base because they don't understand what that is. But anyway, he slipped and he hit his head. So that's the idea that HaKadosh Baruch Hu lets the goyim slip and think these silly things. And the Chavetz Chaim says that he compares it to a carpenter who needs to glue two boards together, except that one of them has a small bump and it won't fit smoothly one against the next. So he says that either to make them fit and glue together, you can smooth out the bump, or you can make a hole in the board exactly where the bump is so that the boards will fit exactly perfectly together. Both the boards are now imperfect, right? One board has a hole and one board has a bump, but now they fit together. So he says, similarly, Kodesh Baruch Hu did these things to the Goyim so that they could be, deserving of punishment because they're Rishayim, etc. He made a small hole in their brain, so to speak, right, to allow these silly, imperfect, foolish thoughts to go into their brain. So just like you can now glue this imperfect board into this onto this other imperfect board, you can take this ridiculous concept of avodah zarah and put it into someone somebody who has a hole in their head or whatever it is. What's the mushal? What's that parable? So a parable. Rav Pincus explains it's not that these people aren't smart, and here's where the mind shift. If you've been spacing out for a little bit, here's where the mind shift I think is very, very crucial and valuable for us who are working on ourselves. Pincus says it's not that these people aren't smart. They are smart. They are very smart. They just have a hole in their brain. Right, as the Israeli phrase goes, they have a juk barosh. They have a cockroach in their brain. Right, the Chafetz Chaim is like as follows. Let's say you see a smart person do something stupid, right? Let's say you're smart, or you see a tzaddik do something wrong. So usually, what we'll do is that we'll come to one of two conclusions: either the guy wasn't actually so smart, right, or the guy wasn't such a great tzaddik, right, or right, the stupid thing or the usser thing that he did wasn't actually either stupid or usser. Right? Usually those are one of the two options. Either, I didn't understand what he did, and maybe I'm the stupid one, or maybe I'm the fool, right? Or right, maybe this guy's just putting on a charade, right? And he's just scamming us. He's not actually as smart or as righteous as he thought he was. The truth, though, says Rapinkus, is that neither of those are true. That the smart person could be smart, but he could simultaneously have like a hole in their brain. I don't mean physical. I mean like a concept, right? Into which some stupid things have been inserted, right? Just like the Avodah Zarah is, right? They're not all stupid, right? Not all the Christians and Muslims or Buddhists are stupid, right? Okay, maybe they're like the flat earthers. I think we can all agree the flat earthers are pretty stupid, right? Okay, maybe the Scientologists are probably pretty stupid. Okay, whatever. But tachlis, you know what I'm saying? These people are not stupid, yet they worship ridiculous things because there's no stira, there's no contradiction. A person can be smart and you can have a couple stupid tendencies or brain farts or whatever. Right? So similarly, a tzaddik can be from, but they can have a small hole in their brain or whatever, or in their neshama, when it comes to this halacha or this mitzvah, etc. This, says of Pincus, right, is the avodah of Sefiras HaOmer, right, to make sure Hashem ein od milvado, that Hashem is one, that Hashem is complete, that Hashem is in every aspect of our lives, and it is a crucial, I think, perspective, right, for people who are growing. Why? Because first of all, you guys are all from people, right? I don't need to give you guys a Shana speech anymore, right? But sometimes when we go back to Chutz La'aretz, we have a trouble with growth. Well, why is that? So again, this is not a Chutz La'aretz shmooze or an influences shmooze or whatever, which we've done before. Because one of the things that stunts our growth when we leave SEM and really throughout our lives, right, is because we view ourselves as an all or nothing proposition, right? Instead of seeing ourselves as a frum person with a hole in their neshama or something when it comes to, I don't know, like Lashon Hara, right? We see ourselves as a bum who speaks Lashon Hara. Well, once you define yourself as a bum, right? So that bum also, I don't know, eats treif and uses their phone on Shabbos and doesn't make brachos or whatever. Right? So you don't try and work on filling any hole or plugging any hole, and you just give up because you're a bum. He says Rav Pinkus, on Sefiras HaOmer, our job is to look at ourselves as a bas melech or a ben melech, if you happen to be listening to the recording, good, with a few holes in your neshama. Right? You left Mitzrayim, right? Yatsa me'avdos l'cheros, right? You're free. You're a princess, queen, whatever the phrase is, and hopefully not a Jap, right? Hopefully not a Jewish American princess. Good. You have holes in your neshama. Okay. Yes, you do. But your job is to plug them, right? It's not a stira. It's not a contradiction, right? Kodesh Baruch Hu created the world with lachlik, right? With these places, these things that sometimes we get these kind of silly ideas in our head. And our job is to plug the holes. And now, instead of looking at your avodas Hashem and working on your midos or working on your lashon hara or working on your hilchos Shabbos or whatever it is, and instead of looking at it as an existential crisis, I can't believe. Okay, Leia's not here actually, so I won't say it. Fine, but I can't believe I did X, Y, and Z. Right? Instead of that, you're looking at a job. You're looking at it as a job. It's not that, oh my gosh, I'm such a terrible person. I can't believe I did X, Y, and Z. No, you're a bas aliyah who has holes in their neshama that they're working on plugging and they're working to improve on. Right? We're used to saying like I daven, I learn a little bit, I do a little chesed, but I also say lashon hara, and I also get angry, and I also, I don't know, listen to rap music or whatever. So I'm like 60% tzaddik and 40% Russia. That's the wrong attitude. right? You are a bas melech with things to fix. And our avoda on Sphira is to change our mindset and to get to work plugging the holes, right? To get to work realizing that Hashem shlemus, Hashem's oneness, Hashem's completeness, Hashem is involved in every single aspect, both of the world and our lives. And just because you, I don't know, choose our example from before, just because you learn morning Seder, but you don't make a bracha on a cup of water, doesn't mean you're a Russia. It means that you're trying to involve Hashem in every single aspect of your lives and you're working on it. Now, how, again, I probably I may have should have said this earlier, but I don't know. Okay, but it's fine. How does Rav Pinkus know that this is specifically the time to do that, right? Why isn't this shmooze happening on Sukkot or whatever, Hanukkah or whatever? Because he says there are several halachos and a lot of emphasis that revolve around Sphira that have to do with shleimus, that have to do with wholeness, that has to do with completeness. Pasuk says, Sheva Shabbosos Timimos Tiena. You have to count 7 complete weeks. Right? You can't have it lacking. The halacha is that you can't make early Shabbos on Shavuos. You can't bring in Shavuos early. Sometimes we'll bring in Shabbos early in the summer. Can't do it for Shavuos because the weeks, the amount of time has to be complete. You have to go from Pesach to Shavuos, and you can't cut it off by a couple hours to start early. You have to count every single day. Right, you have to. It has to be a complete counting. If you want to count with a bracha the whole way through, right? If you miss a day, it's not complete. Right, you can no longer count with a bracha. Right, the Mechilta in Parshas Yisro tells us that at Ma'amad Har Sinai on Shavuos, Hashem healed all the sick people. No one had a physical blemish. Everyone was healed and complete physically. So our job is to become complete spiritually, right, as well, right? Our job is on Sefiras HaOmer is to fill the holes in the neshama, right? Pick something, right? Work on it every single day. It doesn't have to be the same thing, could be different things, but switch your mindset. Don't think of yourself as 60%, 40%. You're not someone who is failing to do this, and how could I do this? And therefore, I guess I give up. You are someone who is working to be sholem, and our job in Sefiras HaOmer is to plug all the holes, right, and therefore be ready to be for Kabbalah Satorah, to be as sholem as we can be, right, to receive Hashem and all of His oneness. All right, dudes, have a amazing week. Well, I guess with questions, I guess I didn't really take any questions, but I guess we could stop that.
I have questions.
Okay, great.
Okay. First of all,